right, and it's exactly 5 minutes past 7 p.m. on the 26th day. Um, okay, so it's 6 minutes in the studio. My watch says 5 minutes. My producer is just reminding me that it's actually six. And you're very welcome. I'm sure you were expecting to hear Kobe Nkrumah Spikey's voice, but no, it's me, Nhyira Addo, sitting in for Spikey. And today I'll be jumping into a very interesting conversation. Now, we often think that privacy has always been about being able to um, do the things you naturally would do at home, behind closed doors, or in your bathroom, and be fully assured that only you have the right to that space and that privacy. But in the 21st century, privacy has gone way beyond privacy of our personal space and the things we do within it. Now, the world has even instituted since 2007 the Data Privacy and Protection Day, which is also called the Data Protection Day. It's an internationally recognized event that occurs on the 28th of January. And the purpose of the International Privacy Day is really to raise awareness and promote privacy and data protection best practices across the globe. And it's currently observed in the US, Canada, Israel, and more than 47 other countries in Europe and across Africa and the rest of the world. Now, Ghana is not left out in this, and so joining me for a conversation that we've dubbed Owning Your Privacy, which incidentally is drawn out of the theme for this year and following from last week's conversation about privacy on your apps, you know, what you're going through, the whole WhatsApp conversation and a whole bunch of other conversations around how safe our data is on the web and on the apps that we use. We will have a theoretical yet practical conversation around data privacy and why it's important that you own your privacy and how you can own that privacy. And so joining me to do this is the founder and executive director of the Africa Digital Rights Hub, Teki Akuetteh-Falconer, who herself lawyer, first Data Protection Commission executive director in Ghana, and also a data practitioner, a data privacy practitioner and advocate. You're welcome to Geek Squad.
Thank you, Nhyira.
Now, first of all, I think that it would be nice to get a sense of what the Ghanaian data privacy ecosystem feels like and looks like today. I know we have a commission, we have a law, but what exactly, how will you describe the ecosystem today?
I would say that it's probably a little much better than I left it because there's a heightened awareness around the issues of privacy. So we're in a much better place, but we could be doing a lot more. In the past year, we have seen a number of public incidents. The most recent one was what the Electoral Commission, we faced with the Electoral Commission publishing the voters register of registered voters on Google Docs, and we saw, the public outcry. And there's been a number of incidents that have raised, from where I sit, from a practitioner's point, issues around a thorough understanding of data protection, a thorough understanding of how to effectively implement data protection, because the law is one thing, but when it comes to data protection and privacy, a lot of it hinges on enforcement and compliance and effective implementation of what the law says. So if the law says that, you have an exemption, what does that mean? It's more of a practical thing. And I think that is what has been missing in the space. Invariably, people are becoming more aware, but there's still a lot of room for improvement by pushing for more practices that respect and recognize these laws as well.
Fantastic. Now, the laws are there, enforcement is always a big deal. Whose responsibility would you say it is to, as it were, ensure that these laws that we have delivers on what it was meant to?
I would say that the first point of call obviously would be the regulator. That is why the law was set up and it was given the mandate to ensure that those that are required to, respect and obey certain standards and requirements comply with those standards. So the first point of call will be on the regulator. The second point of call is the individual whose information is being handled. Because if we do not complain as individuals when our rights are violated, then, it's work as usual. Nobody is complaining. And I believe you've seen, even with the WhatsApp incidents, you saw that the worldwide public outcry got them to sit up and pull back. And it all goes to show the importance of privacy. Coming from that space, I've heard a lot of people say that, privacy is not that important. But the important thing with all of these things is that we need to understand that it's an inherent part of us as human beings. And so whilst people may not associate privacy or data protection with the law, or may not understand the intricacies of what the law gives them or does not give them in terms of their rights, they have a sense of what they want to protect. They have a sense of what they want to share with other people. And so when organizations or individuals tend to, violate or get into the space that they feel is protected, they will always, fight back. And that's what we've been seeing, not just in Ghana, but all over the world.
So, of the fundamental human rights that we all are entitled to, privacy is now a critical part of that, essentially because of the fourth industrial revolution world we live in today.
It has always been. In fact, if you look at our lives as human beings, right? Professor Kanatachi, who's the UN Special Rapporteur, did some research that he had been conducting for years. And it was quite interesting to find out that even in traditional architecture, from Europe through to America, through to Asia and Africa, the concept of architecture was always built around privacy of the home. So even how our homes were stationed, where we had our general areas or courtyards, were all where the bedrooms were, where the washrooms were all built around the concept of privacy. So the notion of privacy, even though it became enshrined as a fundamental right, had always been with us. If you go to a village right now, an uneducated person, and you're communicating with them in a village, they have a sense of what kind of conversation they want to have with you. If you're having a discussion with your grandmother who probably has not read anything about data protection or privacy, they have a sense of what to share with you and how. And that goes to point that it is not just an issue of a law, it is an issue of how human beings were created and how we relate, to each other. And that's why it's very important to protect it, because without that, you're killing the very essence of humanity. And that's why I believe it's very important. Even more important now, because we have all these technologies that are much more invasive than they were before.
It's exactly 17 minutes past 7. This is Geek Squad, and I'm sitting in for Spiky. My name is Nhyira Addo, and we're discussing owning your privacy. Now, technology is a big part of our lives today, and that means we are constantly interacting. We're putting out information about ourselves out there, and so helping us appreciate how important it is and how it is that you can own your own privacy is the founder and executive director of Africa Digital Rights Hub, Teki Akuetteh-Falconer. In the last few minutes, we've spent some time trying to appreciate the Ghanaian data privacy ecosystem, whose responsibility it is to ensure that we're all owning our privacy. And it doesn't only sit with the regulator, but also the individual whose data is out there. You do have a role to play. And the importance or the relevance of privacy in relation to our fundamental human rights. And you know, the examples that Teki just gave about the fact that the way architecture has evolved over time had always had privacy at the core of it. So it's always been with us. We've only just recently codified it to fit the times we're living in. Okay. Now, one of the major challenges facing data protection has been the awareness and capacity. So, for example, if I have signed on to a whole bunch of services and apps, the information that I need to read, the fine print is so fine that I just click OK because I want to get on with it.
Yes.
One may lack the capacity to understand what's being said.
Yes.
How do we balance this capacity issue and awareness? I know I don't want to put out everything out there, but I don't also have the capacity to know what to agree to and what not to.
And invariably, sometimes you don't even have a choice. You have to use the application. You have to use the website. So you don't have a choice. And that is where the role of the commission is very important. You know, because this is where the regulator plays a very significant role in making sure that these organizations are putting out the right terms and conditions. They are making it easy for people to read and understand. That in itself, having said that, it's quite challenging as well. For the technology providers, and I'm not holding word for them because I think that there are many ways by which they could do well. But if you look at places like Europe, and I believe you're aware of what we now call the GDPR, you know, the GDPR puts very strict requirements on how these terms and conditions and policies should be put out.
That's right.
You know, so after GDPR, you would see that most websites that are accessible to Europe have tried to simplify some of these issues by
the terms and conditions,
the policies, because the idea is that you're communicating with individuals. And so if you know your target audience, then you should be able to communicate with them in a language that they understand. You know, because the fact that you've put out terms and conditions, and that's what became the whole data protection ecosystem, the fact that you put out terms and conditions and I agree to it does not necessarily mean that you are absolved of any further responsibility if I did not appreciate what you sought to, you know, project in a way and manner that affects me negatively. So, yes, terms and conditions are important, but the regulator should be there to make sure that these terms and conditions are simplified in a way that the audience, at least the ordinary person on the street, will be able to read and have a fair understanding of how their information will be used and processed. Yes, the technical parts of it that you need the lawyers to read can be in fine print somewhere, but majority of us, as you clearly noted, do not understand it. But having said that, it is equally important that, especially when we are dealing with very sensitive information about ourselves and we are sharing, even if we do not understand, we should go through and ask questions. You know, we should ask questions. We should not take it on face value and just accept everything.
Wonderful. I would like to go back to the recent public outcry around the whole WhatsApp situation.
Yes.
Now, it's actually one of the biggest challenges that, you know, one would face. You use an app, you've become very accustomed to pretty much doing everything on there. I mean, there's been instances where people have contacted other people they never knew via WhatsApp. They have had conversations that's led to doing business. Money is changing hands, and life is going on. Suddenly, there's this big outcry, and I think that I could be totally wrong on this, but a lot of these things may have become front center of our minds because of the Cambridge Analytica, global spectacle. Is it worth worrying the way we did and the whole outcry, or it was just, people becoming a little too sensitive and cynical of what big tech is doing with our data?
I think that any form of worry is important, and it tells you one thing, that even if it may be cynical, even if it tells you that maybe you're not communicating whatever it is effectively, if what you're doing is not contrary to their interest, which is what the worry is about. So people are genuinely worried. It may be right or wrong, but it comes down to whoever is communicating with you. Are you communicating enough? We know that later on WhatsApp came up to say that what the community or individuals are saying they're doing with the new policy is not what they intend to do. But it tells you that there's a communication problem, and that has always been something that needs to be at the forefront of data protection. If you're bringing out a new policy, especially in a community that you have probably the largest world population on this community, and you're changing your policies, what are some of the right procedures that you should be using? And I believe that WhatsApp and Facebook, they've in the past, if you look at their Facebook policies, they have very interesting ways of effectively communicating with their communities. And I think that this just failed to do that. To just have a pop-up say that, okay, we're changing our policies, read through the policies. And it's quite difficult. I went through, but it's very difficult to even appreciate what they are trying to say. People get cynical. Because then there's a sense of, oh, you're trying to hide something. And so the first opening they see, oh, you want to share our information on Facebook, or you want to share that information with Facebook, that. And remember that when Facebook bought WhatsApp, remember there was an outcry.
That's right.
And in Europe, there was a decision that clearly regulators came together and gave them an option not to link information on
between the two platforms
in order to maintain the sanctity of the earlier platform, because people had not subjected themselves to it. So you should realize that there's already a history, and people are very incensed about that. So you need to take your time and then really explain and break away from that, if that's not what you intend. So I don't think, the concerns were misplaced at all.
Is there a fine balance between data collection and data use? Between government, the data subjects themselves, corporate organizations, institutions, and individuals?
Yes, the the fine line between sharing and collecting information effectively, especially between third parties, is what standards, right? It depends on a number of factors. One, you should be able to clearly tell people what you are collecting and what you're using the information for. This can be done even if, for instance, you're sharing information with government for security or other reasons that you don't need justification for. That can be done. You need to also put in place oversight systems that ensure that it is not abused. And I think that is where, especially in Africa, there's a lack. So if a government agency is collecting and using information, and another government agency, i.e. the regulator, what powers do they have to be able to effectively monitor and ensure compliance with the laws as well. So you need to put in place oversight, share, be very transparent. That's the first thing I would say. Be very transparent, share as much information about what you're collecting and using the information for. And then the second thing is put in place an oversight system and processes that ensure that these rights are not necessarily abused by any one party. Once you're able to do that, you'll be able to achieve that fair balance, and you can justify collecting and sharing information in a way that does not violate privacy rights.
Absolutely. If you just tuned in, you're listening to your superstation Joy 99.7 FM, and the show is Geek Squad with me, Nhyira Addo. I would like to urge you all to join us with your thoughts. You can use the hashtag Geek Squad and tweet at us at Joy997, or mention me at GH Rainmaker in your tweet. Our conversation is focusing on the importance of owning your privacy, and joining me to have this conversation is the founder and executive director of the Africa Digital Rights Hub, Teki Akuetteh-Falconer. And there's a whole lot that we're learning right now. So if you have some thoughts or questions, do send them through. You can also use our WhatsApp line, which is 024-1111-997, and we'll be happy to field any questions that you may have. Now, as a follow-up to the balance between data collection, management, and use, I'd like to go back to a moment in our recent history that was very controversial, which was the release of the, albeit, well, whether it was inadvertent or intended, release of personal data on the electoral roll ahead of last elections. Now, if we would situate that in the space of what across the continent has become quite rampant, data breaches, where people actually steal data. This, on the other hand, was put out there inadvertently. Whose responsibility it is to the data subject when data is stolen or put out incorrectly?
So, usually, if there is a breach to the laws, right, the party that breached or compromised the information is at risk of facing the consequences for their actions. So that will purely tell you that if I put out, first of all, if I collect your information under data protection laws, I have a responsibility under the law to ensure that your information is adequately protected. And that is why from the beginning I said that data protection goes beyond the law. A lot of the time we get drawn into the legalese where we're then saying, I have a right to publish, I have the right not to publish. But when it comes to data protection, especially when you're looking at implementation within technology, it's very practical. And that's why the law is not enough, because if the law even gives you a power, there are still certain conditions under which you're supposed to take certain actions. So if you decide to publish, which you may have the right to do, the questions that will continue to linger on within the data protection laws will be, how do I publish in a way where I fulfill my legal mandate and yet minimize the risk that that legal mandate will, have on the ordinary person. And I think that in the case of the recent publication, that's where that was missing. The good thing was that the Electoral Commission found the need and listened to maybe, the public pressure and was able to pull the information out. But I think that a simple thing as to look at what other jurisdictions do would have thrown a bit more light on the best way to publish the information so as to minimize the negative effects of it. The reason why what happened was very risky was that the information was published in a format that made it easily accessible for the bad people to do a lot with it within a short time. So you're making it easy. Essentially, you're just serving them information that can be used to people's detriment on a silver platter. And that was where the risk was, which is why I say that data protection, we should stop looking at these issues from a purely perspective of the fact that it is a law and the law has given me exemptions or the law has given me certain rights or limits from my rights. We have to be very practical, because it affects people on a day-to-day basis. And we need to look at how to effectively implement these things within that. Otherwise, if you look at the letter and the spirit of the law itself, you will be violating, the law, even sometimes where you have clear, rights within that.
Why should one be concerned about, their data breach?
Because a lot can happen with a data breach. If someone collects my personal information, if someone collects my credit card information, if they have my name and my date of birth and other vital information that go on to create a unique identity, there are a number of things they can do. They can create an identity, a virtual identity of me, and perform acts in my name.
For which you will be fully liable until you can extricate yourself.
Exactly. And I think there's a movie that talks about identity theft.
Oh, identity theft. Yes.
And I think identity theft throws more light on what could happen. And you would see the struggle that you have to go through to show that it is not you. In this day and age where we are even collecting biometric information, and the Africa Digital Rights Hub have done a number of texts on the risks of how many biometric data is being collected out there, which contains very sensitive information such as your iris, fingerprints. If just anybody collects this information and they don't adequately protect it, and it gets compromised, there's no way if somebody uses my fingerprints to create another set of ID and use it, I can come and say that it wasn't me.
I just did a quick count. The National Identification Authority, the SNIT, there's the Electoral Commission, Passport Office, DVLA. I think even a political party crowd wanted to do or has done it, but why are you worried about all these institutions who are supposedly rightfully collecting information to help them discharge their mandate to the people, collecting so much biometric data?
When it comes to biometric data, the less you have of it, the more centralized it is, the better it is, because then there's only one source and you can put in all the investment, because like I said, it's very critical. It's a very important part. If somebody steals someone's biometric information, there's no going back. You can't deny if someone uses your biometric data for something, you can't deny that it wasn't you. Because the information is directly linked to you.
In fact, you can deny it, but evidence is too stacked up against
it's you. It's what else can you come up with? So there's a very huge risk involved in the collection. And yes, as many agencies can collect, but the risk there is that the moment the systems become proliferated, it means that you are also distributing the finances that could be put together for security for one. You are spreading it thinly.
So it's like you're building 10 vaults when you could
Exactly.
just build one very
Exactly. And
big
it's
one.
very expensive to protect.
Mm.
So in Ghana, we just did the ID ecosystem assessment research to really look at what the ID ecosystem looks like. And we found out that right from the beginning, the NIA was supposed to be the central repository of all biometric data, but currently is so that everybody can pull and
From the
access it from
NIA.
that source.
Okay.
But that is not really happening. And that has not happened because possibly of how long it took for the NIA to finally take off and all of that. But of course, what it means is that now we have citizens' biometric data scattered across, and there are even situations where private individuals or organizations are also collecting biometric data, which we need to be very worried about as well.
Well, yeah. So access control requires my fingerprint. Should I be worried if I'm working in an environment where I need to give my biometric information, sort of, fingerprint or iris, to access the building within which I work?
Yes, so if you end up using the same system to access other things elsewhere, in other places, maybe you're using it to access your bank accounts and all of that. I mean, the IT gurus will tell you if someone can copy that information and then imprint it into a system that recognizes it as you and opens or gives access to information that they should not, then obviously there is a huge risk there. So any form of biometric information that is collected and shared, there is a huge risk to it. And I think that it must be, it shouldn't be easily done. And if we're doing it, we should think carefully through it. That's not to say you can't do it, but there's a risk there, and so when we're doing it, we have to thoroughly think about it. We have to look at the security of it just to make sure that we protect people.
39 minutes past 7 on a Tuesday evening. This is Geek Squad with me, Nhyira Addo, sitting in for Spiky. And in the studio with me is Teki Akuetteh-Falconer. She's the Executive Director and founder of Africa Digital Rights Hub. And our conversation is about owning your privacy. Now, on the 28th of January since 2007, the world celebrates International Privacy Day. It's a day set aside to create awareness and ensure that we are doing what we must do as subjects and users of platforms that require that our personal information is out there. And those who have access to that personal information must also manage them with integrity, as well as those whose job it is to ensure that that integrity is done, which is the data and privacy, what do you call them? The controllers and the regulators, yes.
The controllers.
So the regulators must also ensure that everyone's doing right. So we'll be sharing some practical steps that you can take to ensure that you're owning your own privacy. With that, Teki, I'd like us to talk about our footprint, digital footprint.
Yes.
Sometimes someone says it's good to Google yourself. I mean, we go online and we go to all kinds of places, do all kinds of stuff. How worried should one be about their digital footprint?
I think that we should be worried because we're not even fully aware of the kind of digital footprints we're putting out there. So a lot of these things are happening on our blind side, and that is where the worry comes in, right? Because if you are aware, then you know what is happening, you can do something about it. But most of us are not even aware of the nature of this digital footprint. Googling yourself is one thing, but I believe the techies will tell you that there's even a lot more that you can do, and you would be scared at what you will be able to find about yourselves on the net. So the safer part is Googling yourself. I don't think that will even give you alarming information. If you're able to go back and you see where you moved from, what you woke up to, what you ate, which hospital you visited when, and then over a long period of time, it is telling you, it's painting a certain picture of you. So someone now knows Nhyira possibly better than you even know yourself. Then that is something that you should be worried about. They can even, to the extent of even predicting what you're going to do next, going into your head more or less, and thinking for you, and doing things that, telling people how you're going to behave in various scenarios, because they've collected so much information over time on you, and they have it all at their fingerprints with artificial intelligence. Then, and so they can predict what Nhyira is going to do in the next 5 or 10 or 20 years. And you essentially don't have, total control of your mind as a human being. Then that's something that you should be worried about. And
when I just remembered, I think it was in 1997 or 1998 when I first saw the movie Enemy of the State.
yeah.
And just as you were speaking, scenes from it just came back, flooding back into my mind.
The security agencies will tell you that it's the best time, to be an intelligence officer because they have all the information they need at their fingertips.
I believe so. We do put out quite a lot. Should we then go back to just paper filing?
If you've been able to get off grid, I mean, you've been lucky, but I don't think a lot of us will be successful going off grid. And in as much as this is scary, and that is why the call for legislative interventions, the call for enforcement, and the call for strengthening, the regulators across the world is very important, because somebody has to police, in all of these things, so that we as individuals do not suffer the consequences of this. And that's why we put in place legislations. That's why we set up regulators to ensure that people are adequately protected.
Yeah. When I made the list of where our biometric data, at least my biometric data, is at all these places, SNIT, NIA, DVLA, EC, Passport Office, okay, and then my employers, and maybe a few other places. But here's the thing. One of the biggest challenges that you find, and I don't know whether this is an African problem or maybe something that affects the United States, maybe a few weeks ago, that the regulator is seen as an appendage of the government. So how, as a former regulator yourself, how do you go and get a SNIT or an NIA or Electoral Commission, DVLA, Passport Office to comply, especially when you are all in the same family?
You see, in Nhyira, there are state institutions, and they all have their mandate. The judiciary is a state institution. It has its mandate, and there are rules governing it. And so when you look at organizations like data protection, that has been the reason why worldwide there's been a call for their independence. Okay, others have done this by ensuring that they are appointed through Parliament, through very transparent procedures to ensure that they owe no allegiance to. But of course, in Africa, we've seen that has not so far worked. There are very few regulators that do not have, some kind of control or access with government. But the interesting thing with data protection and privacy is that it's not a political creature. And so if we set up the systems and the structures in such a way as to take away that independence from the institution, you are going to create more problems for yourself in the long run than solutions, right? Because they are regulating a number of things. The data protection is not there. In the UK and other places, the information regulator works very effectively with government. But at the same time, they do not shy away, because what tends to happen is that if you have a regulator that is afraid to tell a government institution that you're doing the wrong thing, so come back and straighten your back, the public is going to cry out. And at the time of the public outcry, it may be too late. And the challenges may be upfront, and you won't be able to manage it, because a lot of these issues boil down to trust and integrity of the institution. So it's even in your own interest to make sure that you have a regulator that is very strong, that is very efficient, and works closely with your agencies. Not, when I say closely, not because they cannot put them in check, but works closely so as to help them manage the issues better. The issue with data protection is not about policing and putting people in jail, because a lot of the damage would have been already done when usually regulators are whipping people. When a regulator decides, I'm going to prosecute you, usually a lot more damage has been done, and the prosecution would not necessarily revert. So most regulators manage. They manage industry, they manage institutions by working closely with them, to ensure that they are doing the right thing, to minimize the risks that are out there. And you do that by giving them the power and the necessary authority and resources, because it demands a lot of resources, to ensure that they are able to work effectively.
Right, we have just a little over 10 more minutes to wrap this conversation up. Time certainly flies when you're having a good time, and I certainly am. Now, I would like us to focus on what we have to do practically to ensure that we're safe online. In this day and age where we've been totally flipped upside down by this pandemic, we had 9 months where our children were, in fact, we all pretty much did the things we ought to do for work, leisure, and work and life online.
Yeah.
So we swapped a lot of information. Kids had to go online to register for school and things like that. How do we ensure that going forward we're able to be safer online, leave the right kind of digital footprint, and ultimately save ourselves from any malicious intent out there lurking in the dark?
Okay, so the very first thing that I would say is that before you join any platform, ask yourself these questions. Is this really something that I need? Is this necessary? And you should ask yourself, what kind of information do I want to share on this platform? That's the first thing before you join. You shouldn't joining as many platforms with the same information means you're spreading yourself. You're putting more information out there. So you should be very careful and choosy about what platforms to join and why you're joining it. Now, when usually for these platforms, we're setting up with basic information. I would say that unless it is a very critical thing around health or other things, don't put the barest minimum of information that you'll be allowed to set up with. And then try to limit, so as much as possible, don't allow for, so that's where it comes to looking at their policies, right? Try as much as possible to limit the privacy settings to the barest, so that don't go clicking and accepting all the privacy settings. Try as much as possible to read it, if who they say they're sharing the information with, and be fine with it. Today, most platforms will ask your permission before they will share. So that means that if you go through, you should give appropriate permission. Of course, there's the tick everything button there, but I wouldn't advise you stay away from that. Look through everything and accept only things that you know you've chosen. Areas like your password, change them regularly and put in very strong passwords. If you Google or do a basic internet search around what is the best way to put out a very strong password, they can give you ideas on how to create strong passwords based on a combination of characters and letters and numbers and other things. Those are some basic things you can do in terms of password. You should also be very much aware of the nature of these platforms. So we should try as much as possible to read a little bit around these issues. Africa Digital Rights Hub, we have a number of fireside chats where geeks and ordinary people talk in very ordinary language about what is happening in the space.
Oh, so they don't speak geek there?
No, nobody's allowed to speak geek there. So, we try to do a lot of this to raise awareness and break the issues down, try and get as much of that content as possible. Because unfortunately in this space, the best person to protect themselves is the individual, which is why the theme owning your privacy. Owning your privacy means that you should be in control. You should be aware of what you're engaging in. You should be aware of the consequences if anything goes wrong, of where you're going to go to and how. And so once you're able to do these basic things, and then you should be fine. And please, let's stay away from just sharing too much. It's not necessary. Let's limit the number of content. I think especially with social media, there's that sense that it's almost like, I think people feel because they are in the safety or privacy of their rooms, they are sharing within that space, but it's not. You're putting it out worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, people pretty much write about everything they do. Oh, I was here today, I did this today, and I did that.
Sometimes we do that for affirmations and other things. Social media has its benefits, and that's why the system was created. So it gets us hooked. We all need that approval from someone, and we like the likes and the love and the hugs and all the emojis that get thrown at us. So, but we should be a bit more careful.
Life is real, it's not virtual.
Yes. Virtual is real as well. Virtual is real. So is just an extension into your home. So once we become more aware, we should be more responsible about how to engage on these platforms.
Okay. Well, it's been a wonderful conversation. I think I'm going to ask you just one final question. So we've been talking about the Africa Digital Rights Hub that you founded since you left the Data Protection Commission. What is it all about? I mean, the name says a little bit, but
So Africa Digital Rights Hub, it was founded out of concern that myself and a few of my mentors had seen across Africa in the space. And so we focus on 4 thematic areas: data protection and privacy, obviously, intellectual property rights as relates to the digital ecosystem across Africa, online child protection, and cybersecurity. Our main focus is to push for Afrocentric policies and interventions based on research, which was something we thought was missing across Africa. So over time, we've been driven by a lot of the issues that we see across the continent, push for more research insight into them, and then based on the research, make recommendations and engage, the various stakeholders, governments, individuals, industries around the issues of our research.
Wow. Okay. Well, thanks so much. Teki Akuetteh-Falconer, founder and executive director of the Africa Digital Rights Hub. And you've been listening to Geek Squad with me, Nhyira Addo. The conversation had been about owning your privacy. Here's some a recap of some of the practical steps that Teki shared with us, that you must be asking yourself whether you truly need to be on that platform, and if you answer that in the affirmative, you should decide what kind of information you want to be sharing. You should be choosy and as much as possible, just give the barest minimum of information, because once you put it out there, it's out there and you may not be able to get it back or control what happens to it. And you should limit the privacy settings, but more importantly, read the fine print to the best of your ability, ask questions, read about the various platforms you're going on to be able to ascertain whether they really are worth your while and will keep your information safe. After all, you can't own what you don't know.
Yes.
So on that note, I'd like to say a big thank you to you for tuning in, and a big thank you to you, Teki, for availing yourself and sharing your insights and expertise with us.
Thank you so much, Nhyira. Pleasure to be here.
It's always nice catching up with you. So until next week, when hopefully Spiky will be back in the chair. This has been Geek Squad with me, Nhyira Addo, and let's keep the conversation ongoing on social media. Tweet at me at GH Rainmaker, or let's meet up via the hashtag Joy Geek Squad. The news is up next, and Bishop Menu is here, and he'll be bringing us the news in a moment. Let me leave you with a song before the news come in. Have a good night, and stay tuned for the rest of the duration of all our programming.